He had everything: power, money, fame. But the one thing he never learned was how to listen. He slammed the table so hard the silverware didn't just jump. It rattled a frantic metallic protest against the pristine white tablecloth. The sound echoed through the hushed, elegant dining room, a jarring punctuation mark in the otherwise serene afternoon. "Are you deaf or just incompetent?" His voice, a low growl that managed to carry across the room, cut through the polite murmur of conversation like a knife. The entire dining room froze. Forks paused mid-air, hushed whispers died on lips, and every eye, discreetly or not, darted towards table 7. You could practically feel the collective intake of breath, the palpable tension hanging heavy in the air. But the waitress, she didn't flinch. Not a muscle. She kept smiling, calm, polite, utterly unreadable. It was like watching a master illusionist at work. How did she do it? Every single day for 3 agonizing months, this billionaire Robert Sterling had screamed at her. He'd berated her for everything from the temperature of his espresso to the way she placed his cutlery. And every single day she answered with that same gentle nod, that unwavering, almost ethereal smile. It was a silent challenge, a baffling enigma he couldn't crack. What he didn't know, what was hidden behind that serene facade, would utterly rewrite his life, challenging every assumption he held about power communication and what it truly meant to be heard. Robert Sterling. The name alone conjured images of glass towers and stock market tickers. His net worth clocked in at a cool $3.7 billion, and he practically owned half the gleaming skyline downtown. But for all his financial might, he also owned a temper shorter than the double-shot espressos he'd invariably send back often with a theatrical flourish and a string of colorful, albeit muffled, complaints. He was a creature of habit, a precision-engineered machine of wealth and routine. He lunched at the same exclusive white tablecloth restaurant, the kind where the hushed clinking of crystal was the loudest sound. Always table 7, always at 12:15 sharp. No deviations. Then Maya arrived. She was the new hire, a graceful presence who floated between tables like a whisper, her movements so fluid you barely noticed her approach or departure. She communicated with small notepads, her quick, graceful hands sketching out orders, and a smile that never ever cracked. It was a smile that seemed to radiate a quiet, unshakable peace. Robert, however, didn't see peace. He saw defiance. He thought it was mockery, a subtle, infuriating jab at his authority. How could someone remain so unfazed? So he yelled louder. His voice would boom, rattling the very foundations of the establishment, demanding attention, demanding a reaction. And in response, she smiled wider. It was an almost imperceptible widening, a deepening of the crinkles around her eyes, but it was there, a silent counterpoint to his escalating fury. The other servers, seasoned veterans of Robert's tirades, flinched. They'd avert their eyes, hurry past their shoulders, hunched in a silent apology for their colleagues' perceived insolence, or perhaps for their own inability to withstand his wrath. But Maya. She simply placed the plate, her touch as delicate as a butterfly's wing, bowed slightly, a gesture of quiet respect, and moved on, unfazed, unbroken. He started coming more often, his lunch routine becoming an almost obsessive ritual. He was drawn inexplicably by the one reaction he couldn't buy, couldn't intimidate, couldn't break. This woman, this quiet enigma, was an anomaly in his carefully controlled world. His rage, initially a spontaneous outburst, began to morph. It grew into a personal sport, a twisted challenge to elicit anything other than that maddening, gentle smile. He'd push, he'd prod, He'd invent grievances, all to see if he could chip away at her composure. He was playing a game he didn't understand against an opponent he couldn't comprehend. And her smile. It grew not out of amusement, but out of something deeper. It was a shield, a silent, powerful armor he didn't even realize she was wearing, protecting a strength he was yet to discover. This daily ritual, this bizarre dance between fury and serenity, was slowly, irrevocably setting the stage for a revelation that would shake Robert Sterling to his very core. Week 6. 6 weeks of relentless, one-sided psychological warfare. 6 weeks of Robert Sterling's booming voice against Maya's quiet grace. He'd had enough, or rather, he thought he had. He cornered the manager, a perpetually harried man named Mr. Henderson, whose suit always seemed a size too tight, reflecting the constant pressure he was under. "Fire her," Robert declared, his voice low but laced with an unmistakable threat. "Fire her today, or I pull every single one of the investors I've brought to this place. And believe me, that's a significant portion of your annual revenue." The words hung in the air, cold and calculated, a clear ultimatum. Robert Sterling wasn't just a customer. He was a financial pillar of this establishment. Mr. Henderson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He knew the stakes. He also knew Maya. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice barely a squeak, "there's something you need to understand about Maya. There's something important about her situation that makes her unique." He trailed off, searching for the right words, for a way to diffuse the impending explosion. "Today," Robert snapped, cutting him off with brutal efficiency. He wasn't interested in explanations, only results. His patience, already razor-thin, had completely evaporated. He saw only insubordination, a challenge to his absolute authority, and he expected it to be dealt with immediately. The manager exhaled slowly, a long, defeated sigh that seemed to deflate his already slumped posture. He knew he couldn't fire Maya, not without revealing her secret, and that wasn't his to share. But he also knew he couldn't lose Robert Sterling's business. At least, speak with her once." Henderson pleaded, a desperate flicker of hope in his eyes. "Just a genuine conversation, not an order. Maybe then you'll see, maybe you'll understand." It was a long shot, a Hail Mary pass, but it was all he had. Robert scoffed, a dismissive sound that conveyed his utter contempt for the suggestion. He left the manager's office, vowing never to return to this ridiculous establishment, to this place that dared to challenge him. He'd find another restaurant, another table, another person to yell at. He was done. Finished. Except he wasn't. The next day, precisely at 12:15, there he was. Same table, same time. And to his infuriated bewilderment, the same smiling waitress gliding towards him with that infuriatingly serene expression. He'd tried to stay away, but some perverse curiosity, some unresolved irritation had pulled him back. He couldn't explain it even to himself. He needed to understand why she wouldn't break. He needed to win this silent battle, though he still didn't grasp the true nature of the fight. The following afternoon, fate, or perhaps just a busy kitchen, intervened. The restaurant ran out of truffle oil, a crucial ingredient for Robert's usual pasta dish, a dish he'd ordered almost ritualistically for weeks. Maya, ever resourceful, quickly wrote on her small notepad, her pen scratching softly against the paper. Then, with her usual unhurried grace, she walked towards Robert's table, notepad extended. He watched her approach, a familiar sneer forming on his lips. He braced himself, expecting an apology, a mumbled excuse, perhaps even a subtle plea for understanding. He was ready to dismiss it, to tear apart her explanation with a sharp, cutting remark. He was ready for the usual dance of his anger and her polite deference. Instead, when he took the notepad, his eyes scanned the neatly written words, and his sneer faltered. his brow furrowed in confusion, then something akin to shock. The words weren't an apology. They weren't an explanation for the missing truffle oil. They were something else entirely, something that hit him with the force of a physical blow. It read, "I can't hear the yelling, I only see smiles." The words weren't accusatory. They weren't defensive. They were simply a statement of fact, delivered with the same quiet dignity she always presented. But they hit him harder than any insult he'd ever fired, harder than any market crash or boardroom betrayal. It was as if the ground beneath him had suddenly shifted. He stared at her, then truly stared for the very first time. Not as a projection of his anger, not as an object of his frustration, but as a person. He looked past the uniform, past the tray, past the ever-present smile. He looked at her eyes, searching for a flicker of fear, a hint of resentment, anything he could recognize. But there was nothing. No hearing aids, no telltale signs of assistive devices, no defensive flinch, no subtle stiffening of her posture, just steady, kind eyes that met his gaze with an unnerving calm. The billionaire who had answers for everything, who could dissect complex financial models and predict market trends with uncanny accuracy, suddenly had none. His mind, usually a whirlwind of strategies and calculations, went utterly blank. The simplicity, the profound truth of her words stripped away all his defenses, all his preconceived notions. He felt a strange mixture of embarrassment, confusion, and a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. The world as he knew it had just tilted on its axis. He realized with a sickening lurch that he hadn't just been yelling at a waitress. He'd been yelling into a void.
Can't remember.
A void that had been reflecting
anything.
back only kindness. The manager, Mr. Henderson, arrived then, breathless and flustered, having clearly rushed over after seeing Maya present the note. He had probably been watching, waiting for this moment for the truth to finally surface. He looked at Robert's stunned face, then at the notepad still clutched in his hand, and seemed to understand that the dam had broken. "Sir," Henderson began, his voice softer now, tinged with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Maya is deaf. She has been since birth. She reads lips incredibly well, mind you, but she can't hear a sound. You're shouting. She's always interpreted your shouting, your animated gestures, as excitement, as passion. She thought you were just a very enthusiastic customer." The manager's word, though delivered gently, felt like a physical blow. Robert's face drained of color, leaving him looking ashen and hollow. The blood rushed from his head, replaced by a cold, sickening wave of realization that washed over him. 3 months. 3 long, brutal months of insults. Slammed fists against the table. Public humiliation, not just for Maya, but for him, though he hadn't seen it that way until now. She'd interpreted every snarl, every furious outburst as animated conversation, every curse, every venomous word as quirky passion. The sheer horrifying irony of it all. He, a man whose words commanded boardrooms and moved markets, had been utterly, profoundly misunderstood, not because of a lack of clarity, but because of a fundamental barrier he had been too arrogant, too self-absorbed to even perceive. The most powerful man in the room, a titan of industry, felt utterly powerless. The weight of his actions, previously dismissed as mere expressions of his personality, now crushed him with their unintended cruelty. He saw himself through Maya's eyes, or rather, through her interpretation of his actions, a man full of boisterous, if somewhat peculiar, enthusiasm. The contrast between his intent and her experience was a chasm. He looked down at the table, his hand trembling slightly. Without a word, he pulled out his wallet, peeled off a crisp $100 bill, and slid it discreetly under his plate. A tip far beyond the norm, a silent, inadequate gesture of apology. He rose, pushed his chair back, and walked out of the restaurant, not pausing to look back. He didn't sleep that night. The manager's words, Maya's note, and the crushing weight of his own ignorance replayed relentlessly in his mind, a silent, tormenting loop. Back home, his sprawling penthouse apartment, usually a sanctuary of controlled luxury, felt cold and hollow. The silence of the night pressed in on him, amplifying the turmoil in his mind. He found himself almost instinctively standing in front of the hallway mirror, a vast, ornate piece that usually reflected only the image of a successful, commanding man. But tonight the reflection was different. He saw the clenched jaw, the raised vein on his forehead that always pulsed when he was in a rage, the accusatory finger he always pointed, a physical extension of his verbal assaults. He replayed every single restaurant scene in his head, but this time he muted the sound. He stripped away the booming voice, the harsh words, the angry intonation. All that remained were the visuals, and what he saw horrified him. Without the context of his own perceived authority or justified anger, he looked like a monster, a grotesque, snarling caricature of a human being. The anger, the frustration, the sheer unpleasantness of his expressions were stark, undeniable. He saw the way Maya had seen him, not hearing the venom, but witnessing the contorted face, the aggressive gestures. He looked like a man possessed, a figure of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a brutal, unvarnished self-assessment, and it shook him to his core. The shame was a bitter, unfamiliar taste in his mouth. He had prided himself on his intelligence, his perception, his ability to read people and situations. Yet he had been utterly blind, profoundly ignorant for months. He, the master of communication in the corporate world, had failed at the most basic human level. Driven by a desperate need to understand, to bridge the chasm he had unwittingly created, he reached for his phone. At 3 a.m., in the oppressive silence of his penthouse, Robert Sterling, the man who shaped industries, Googled American Sign Language basics. He watched shaky amateur videos, his brow furrowed in concentration. He stumbled through the basic alphabet, his fingers clumsy and stiff, unused to such delicate, expressive movements. He tried to mimic the hand shapes, the subtle shifts of the wrist. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he managed to sign his first clumsy, hesitant, "sorry." He looked up at his reflection in the mirror, hoping for some sign of absolution, some flicker of self-forgiveness. But the reflection didn't smile back. It merely stared, a stark, unblinking reminder of the man he had been and the long, difficult road he now had to travel. The weight of his past actions was immense, and a simple, silent apology to himself felt woefully inadequate. But it was a start, a quiet, profoundly significant beginning. The next day, Robert Sterling entered the restaurant not with his usual swagger, but with a hesitant, almost nervous energy. He clutched a small, leather-bound notebook in his hand, a stark contrast to his usual air of unassailable confidence. The other servers, accustomed to his intimidating presence, eyed him warily, their whispers dying down as he made his way to table 7. He didn't boom an order. He simply sat, notebook resting on the pristine tablecloth. Maya approached, not with her usual serene glide, but with a slight hesitation, a cautious curiosity in her eyes. The note from yesterday had clearly shifted their dynamic. She no longer saw him as just an enthusiastic customer. She saw something new, something uncertain. He didn't speak. Instead, with a hand that felt surprisingly unsteady, he flipped the notepad open to a page he had meticulously prepared. He pushed it across the table towards her. On it, in surprisingly neat, if slightly cramped handwriting, it read, "Good afternoon. My name is Robert. I was rude. I am sorry." Maya studied the letters, her eyes moving slowly across the words. Then her gaze lifted to meet his. For a long moment she simply looked at him, searching his eyes, perhaps for sincerity, for a sign that this wasn't another one of his cruel games. The silence stretched
You never
thick
told
with
me.
unspoken tension, with the weight of their past
Why did you
interactions.
not tell me?
Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, her smile returned, smaller, softer, a fragile bloom of understanding, rather than the unshakable shield he had previously encountered. She raised her hands, her movements deliberate and graceful, signing slowly, so he, with his rudimentary knowledge, could follow. Her fingers sculpted the air, each gesture a word,
Forgiveness
a
is
concept, weaving a silent sentence that spoke volumes. Forgiveness is strength. Thank you for learning. Those words, translated by his
Thank
still
you for learning.
fumbling mind, resonated deep within him. Forgiveness was strength. Not weakness, not capitulation. Strength. And her thanks for learning. Not for apologizing, but for the effort to understand. It was a profound distinction. He sat there then for 2 hours, ordering nothing, simply watching her work. He observed her interactions with other customers, how she communicated with her colleagues, the subtle ballet of her hands, the expressive shifts in her eyes. Every interaction felt like a tutorial in humanity, a masterclass in empathy he hadn't known he needed. He saw her patience, her unwavering politeness, her genuine warmth. He saw the quiet resilience that underpinned her every movement. He realized that for all his billions, for all his perceived power, she possessed a wealth of human understanding that he was only just beginning to grasp. He saw how she navigated a world not designed for her, not with
Here is your
resentment,
coffee.
but with
Thank you very
grace
much.
and an astonishing capacity for connection. This was more than just an apology. It was the beginning of an education. Monday morning. The atmosphere in the Sterling Industries boardroom was usually one of tightly controlled anticipation, a hum of ambition and strategic maneuvering. Today, however, it was charged with a different kind of energy. Robert Sterling had called an emergency board meeting, an unusual occurrence outside of a major acquisition or crisis. The executives, sharp-suited and impeccably prepared, sat around the polished mahogany table, exchanging speculative glances. What was this about? A new hostile takeover. A major market shift. Robert strode to the head of the table, not with his usual aggressive confidence, but with a quiet intensity that was far more unsettling. Instead of the expected quarterly projections, the usual barrage of charts and graphs detailing profit margins and growth forecasts, he projected 3 images onto the massive screen behind him. The first was a grainy, candid photo of a child, hands clamped tightly over their ears, eyes wide with distress. The second, a tender image of an elderly woman, her hands gently cupping a grandchild's face, a look of profound love and connection etched into her features. And the third, a simple, almost mundane shot of Maya, his waitress, diligently writing on her notepad. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Whispers broke out. This wasn't typical Sterling. This wasn't about money. Then Robert spoke, his voice clear and resonant, devoid of its usual aggressive edge. "For 3 months," he began, "I behaved like a fool, a cruel, ignorant fool. I mistook grace for defiance and silence for incompetence." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The woman in that third picture," he continued, gesturing to Maya's image, "taught me more about communication, leadership, and humanity in a single moment than all my years in business combined." He then announced a groundbreaking new corporate initiative, one that stunned the room into complete silence. Effective immediately, Sterling Industries will undergo a full accessibility audit across all our global operations. Every office, every facility, every digital platform will be evaluated and updated to ensure complete inclusivity for all abilities. We will be implementing mandatory American Sign Language classes for all staff, starting with senior leadership. A few executives shifted uncomfortably clearly, thinking of their already packed schedules. And, Robert added, his voice gaining a new resolute edge, we are establishing a multi-million-dollar scholarship fund specifically for deaf students pursuing STEM fields, ensuring they have every opportunity to innovate and thrive within our industries and beyond. Half the room, particularly the older guard, looked like they thought he'd finally lost his mind. They exchanged glances that clearly articulated, has he gone soft? Is this a midlife crisis? What about the bottom line? They saw it as a frivolous expense, a deviation from the ruthless pursuit of profit. Robert, however, seemed to anticipate their silent objections. Some of you may be wondering about the cost, he stated, his gaze sweeping across their faces. Let me assure you the cost of ignorance, of limited perspective, is far, far greater. Consider these initiatives an investment in our future, in our talent pool, in our very humanity. And then, with a definitive clap of his hands, he declared, and for those departments that embrace these changes, that show true commitment to fostering an inclusive environment, I'm doubling their budgets, effective immediately. The murmurs that followed were no longer confused, but tinged with a reluctant respect, and perhaps a flicker of genuine interest. Robert Sterling hadn't just changed. He was changing the very fabric of his empire, proving that empathy wasn't just a soft skill, but a strategic imperative. The ripple had begun radiating outwards from a single quiet note, threatening to transform not just a man, but an entire corporate culture. 1 month later, the scent of change, subtle yet distinct, hung in the air at the restaurant. Robert Sterling returned to table 7, but this time he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by Melanie Shaw, Sterling Industries' sharp, no-nonsense Vice President of Human Resources, a woman renowned for her strategic mind and her ability to spot talent from a mile away. Her presence alone signaled that this wasn't a casual lunch. Robert greeted Maya with a nod, a small, genuine smile, and a new familiarity in his eyes. He didn't yell. He didn't even speak. Instead, he pulled out his ubiquitous notepad, already open to a fresh page, and scribbled a message. He pushed it across the table. Maya picked it up, her expression a mix of curiosity and composure. The message was concise, direct, and utterly unexpected. Would Maya consider a role leading our inclusivity program? It was a formal offer, a recognition of her unique perspective and her profound impact on the Billionaire. The new inclusivity program, the one he'd announced at the board meeting, needed a leader, someone who embodied its very spirit. She read it, then looked at Robert, then at Melanie Shaw, who offered a polite, encouraging smile. Maya took her own notepad, her pen moving with its familiar graceful efficiency. She countersigned her response, equally concise, yet infused with her characteristic blend of humility and quiet strength. Only if I keep serving tables. People need to see capability, not charity. Melanie Shaw's eyebrows shot up almost imperceptibly. This was a woman who knew her worth, who understood the power of her presence. Robert, however, simply nodded. He understood. It wasn't about a handout. It was about demonstrating what was possible, about shattering preconceived notions through visible action. Maya wanted to remain a bridge, a living example, not just a policymaker hidden behind a desk. And so Robert promoted her on 2 salaries. She became Sterling Industries' Director of Inclusivity, a powerful corporate role with a substantial salary and influence. But she also retained her title as head server trainer at the restaurant, a position that allowed her to continue her work to interact directly with people to be seen. The press, ever eager for a juicy story, immediately seized on it. They called it a calculated PR move, a cynical attempt by the ruthless billionaire to rehabilitate his image. Hashtags like #Sterling Redemption and #Billionaire PR swirled across social media. But Robert, he called it penance, a genuine, heartfelt attempt to atone for his past behavior to transform his personal failing into a public good. It wasn't about optics for him anymore. It was about righting a wrong, about building a legacy far more meaningful than mere profit margins. It was about creating a world where no one was unheard and everyone had a seat at the table, regardless of how they communicated. The transformation within Sterling Industries wasn't just symbolic, it was systemic, a deep-seated shift that began to permeate every level of the organization. The initial skepticism among some executives slowly began to erode as they witnessed the tangible effects of Robert's new vision. First, the physical spaces. Sterling Industries redesigned lobbies and common areas across their corporate campuses. Gone were the silent, sterile waiting areas. Now looping captions ran on every screen, providing information and news in real time. Emergency announcements, once solely auditory, now included visual cues and ASL interpreters on standby. The aesthetic shifted too, embracing open, accessible designs that prioritized clear sightlines and easy navigation for everyone. Then came the talent acquisition. Job advertisements for Sterling Industries, once focused solely on traditional qualifications, now prominently listed ASL Fluency A+, for a wide range of roles from customer service to engineering. It wasn't just a token gesture, it was a genuine desire to tap into a previously overlooked talent pool. Initially, the stock price dipped 2 points. Analysts, ever wary of social initiatives that weren't directly tied to immediate profit, speculated about Robert's focus shifting from the bottom line. But then something remarkable happened. The stock didn't just recover, it climbed 8 points, surpassing its previous high. Why? Recruitment costs dropped significantly as Sterling Industries became a magnet for diverse talent, especially within the deaf community, who saw a company genuinely committed to inclusion. Retention soared too. Employees felt valued, seen, and heard, or rather, understood. They were proud to work for a company that wasn't just talking about diversity, but actively building it into its DNA. The impact was perhaps most profound among the existing workforce. Engineers who had once hidden their disabilities, fearing it would hinder their careers, now felt empowered to come forward. They asked for sign language orientations for new projects, for accessible communication tools, for an environment where their unique perspectives were not just tolerated, but celebrated. Maya, now thriving in her dual role, made her first significant hire for the inclusivity program, a brilliant deaf coder named Alex. Alex, who had struggled to find a company that truly understood his capabilities, built groundbreaking software. This innovative algorithm, designed to flag emotional tone in text, was initially conceived to help customer service representatives better understand written communications from diverse clients. Robert Ever, the pragmatist, quickly saw its broader application. He now uses that very algorithm inside his own phone, a constant, subtle reminder that true communication often requires looking beyond the obvious, beyond the audible. The ripple effect was no longer just about kindness. It was about tangible, measurable business success driven by empathy and innovation. The daily ritual at Table 7 hadn't ceased. It had merely evolved. Twice a week, Robert Sterling still ate lunch at the restaurant, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The tension was gone, replaced by a comfortable, almost familial rapport. He ordered soup now, not because of a particular craving, but because it took longer to finish. This deliberate choice gave him more time, precious minutes, to practice his burgeoning finger spelling. He'd painstakingly form words, his large, powerful hands still a little stiff, a little awkward, but filled with earnest intent. Maya, ever the patient teacher, would gently correct his palm angles, guide his wrist movements. She'd laugh, a soft, melodious sound that Robert could only imagine, but whose warmth was unmistakable in her bright eyes and crinkling smile when he accidentally signed banana instead of balance. It was a running joke between them, a testament to their unique, evolving friendship. Diners, many of whom had witnessed Robert's past outbursts, now stared not in fear, but in fascination. They saw the once feared tycoon, the man who could make grown men tremble, laughing openly at his own mistakes, completely disarmed by this quiet woman. It was a sight that defied all expectations, a powerful living testament to transformation. Their interactions were no longer about service, but about connection. He tipped her not in cash anymore, but in lessons. Along with the receipt, he'd hand her new vocabulary cards, meticulously prepared, each one a step further in his journey to communicate. He was learning not just a language, but a new way of seeing, a new way of being. Maya, in turn, was teaching him far more than just ASL. She was teaching him patience, humility, and the profound beauty of silent communication. Their lunches became a quiet classroom, a sanctuary where a billionaire learned the most valuable lessons of his life from a waitress who spoke without sound. The true measure of change isn't in grand pronouncements, but in the small, everyday moments when old habits threaten to resurface. The test came, as it always does, unexpectedly. A major supplier notorious for his volatile temper and demanding nature arrived at Sterling Industries furious over a late shipment that threatened to derail a critical project. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He slammed a contract down on Robert's polished desk with a resounding thud, yelled loud enough to make the blinds rattle, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. Employees in the outer office braced themselves. This was it. The classic Sterling eruption. They remembered the pre-Maya Robert, the one who would meet such an outburst with an even fiercer one, an escalating battle of wills that often left collateral damage. They instinctively tensed, preparing for the verbal fireworks, the inevitable clash of titans. But Robert didn't erupt. He inhaled deeply, a conscious, deliberate breath, and in that brief pause, he remembered. He remembered Maya's silent smiles, the profound lesson of her note, the quiet strength she embodied. He remembered the monster he'd seen in the mirror. He consciously chose a different path. Calmly, deliberately, he picked up his notepad. His hand, no longer trembling, moved smoothly across the paper. He wrote, "I can't hear anger today. Let's fix this together." He pushed the note across the desk. The supplier, mid-rant, blinked. He stopped, his mouth hanging slightly open. His furious momentum abruptly halted. He reread the note, then looked at Robert, searching for the familiar spark of reciprocal rage, the challenge he expected. But Robert's eyes were calm, steady, devoid of judgment or aggression. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the supplier's shoulders relaxed. His voice, which had been booming just moments before, lowered. He exhaled a long, shaky breath, and, to the astonishment of everyone within earshot, he sat down. The crisis, which would have typically devolved into a shouting match and a potential rupture of the business relationship, was resolved in 20 quiet minutes. There was no yelling, no threats, just a focused, collaborative discussion on solutions. Word spread like wildfire through the company. "Rage," people whispered, "has left the building." Robert Sterling hadn't just changed his own behavior, he had subtly, powerfully changed the very atmosphere of his empire. He had learned that true strength wasn't about dominating with noise, but about disarming with quiet resolve, creating space for understanding even in the midst of conflict. The annual shareholders' meeting was always a high-stakes affair, a meticulously choreographed display of corporate power and financial prowess. This year, however, Robert Sterling had something different planned. He stepped to the podium, his usual power suit replaced by one that seemed to hang a little less rigidly, a subtle reflection of the internal shift he'd undergone. The room filled with investors, analysts, and journalists buzzed with anticipation. He began by pulling out his phone, not to check a message or reference a note, but to open a video. He projected it onto the massive screen behind him. There was no sound. Just security cam footage from the restaurant, grainy but unmistakably clear. It showed him months earlier screaming at Maya, his face contorted, his gestures aggressive. The raw, unfiltered footage of his past self. And then in bold red letters, captions appeared translating his silent fury into stark, undeniable words. The room fell silent, a collective gasp rippling through the audience as they witnessed the brutal honesty of his past behavior. The video then seamlessly transitioned. It showed footage from the same table now. The contrast was breathtaking. Calm conversation, note exchanges, Maya's patient teaching, Robert's clumsy but earnest signing, and finally, laughter. Genuine, unforced laughter between them. The transformation was laid bare, undeniable, profoundly moving. He clicked off the video, the room still hushed with the weight of what they had just witnessed. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze steady. "Our profit margin," he declared, his voice firm, "grew 12% this past year, a solid, commendable performance thanks to all of you." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. "But our empathy margin," he continued, a faint smile touching his lips, "that I believe grew 100%. And here's the truth," he concluded, his voice gaining a quiet power that commanded absolute attention. "They are the same number if you zoom out far enough." The statement hung in the air, a profound truth delivered with the simplicity of a revelation. Investors, hardened by years of market fluctuations and cutthroat competition, found themselves unexpectedly moved. Some openly wiped away tears. Journalists, usually cynical and detached, frantically typed on their laptops, tweeting quotes before he had even finished speaking. The message was clear: humanizing business wasn't just good for the soul, it was good for the bottom line. Robert Sterling had not only proven his newfound empathy, he had demonstrated its tangible, profitable impact forever, changing the narrative of what success truly meant in the corporate world. The seeds of change Robert had sown were now blossoming into a vibrant, self-sustaining cycle, largely thanks to Maya's quiet leadership. Her presence, her story, and her unwavering commitment to inclusion had become a powerful catalyst. Within a year, Maya had personally trained 40 employees from various departments within Sterling Industries in basic ASL. These weren't just token classes. They were comprehensive programs designed to foster genuine communication and understanding. What was truly remarkable was that 6 of these newly ASL fluent employees weren't originally from Sterling Industries. They had been lured away from rival chains drawn by the company's reputation for inclusivity, and more specifically by Sterling's new policy of paying full tuition for employees to achieve ASL certification. It was an investment that paid dividends in both talent and goodwill. One of the most heartwarming stories to emerge from this initiative was that of Carlos, a new waiter at the restaurant. Carlos had struggled with a severe stutter throughout his entire school life.
Good evening. Welcome to our
The
restaurant.
pressure of speaking, the fear of judgment, had often left him withdrawn and
My name is Carlos,
anxious.
and I'll be your waiter this
But
evening.
sign language for Carlos was a revelation. It gave him fluency without speech, a means of expression that bypassed his vocal impediment entirely. He found a voice not in sound but in movement. Carlos quickly adopted a unique and incredibly effective approach to greeting guests. He
Welcome
would
to our
first greet them in
cafe.
ASL, a warm, welcoming gesture that often surprised and delighted customers. Then, and only then, would he follow up with a verbal greeting, his stutter still present, but now softened by the confidence gained from his initial silent communication. The results were astounding. His tips tripled. Customers, touched by his unique approach and the genuine effort to connect, felt a deeper appreciation for his service. Robert saw the pattern emerging clear as day. When you remove one barrier, when you actively work to make the world more accessible, you
I
don't
need to
just
speak with
help
the
a
board.
single
It's
individual.
urgent.
You remove many barriers for many people in ways you could never have anticipated. It was an exponential effect, a powerful testament to the ripple effect of genuine inclusion. The cycle of empathy, once initiated by a quiet waitress, was now flowing freely through the veins of a vast corporation, enriching everyone it
I need to
touched.
speak with the board.
The transformation wasn't limited to the corporate world. It had fundamentally reshaped Robert Sterling's personal life, too. His mornings, once dedicated to aggressive strategizing and market analysis, now began with a quiet, introspective ritual. He started each day writing 3 things in a small, leather-bound journal, a habit born from his profound experience with Maya. 1. Who needs an apology? This wasn't about grand gestures, but about reflecting on any small slight, any moment of impatience, any perceived unkindness from the previous day, both in his personal and professional interactions. It was an exercise in self-awareness and accountability. 2. Who needs a hand? This question prompted him to think beyond himself, to identify someone, anyone who might benefit from his support, his resources, or simply his attention. It could be a struggling employee, a community initiative, or even a friend facing a personal challenge. 3. Who needs silence? This was perhaps the most profound question, a direct echo of Maya's lesson. It forced him to consider where his own voice, his own demands might be overwhelming others, where space and quiet observation were more valuable than intervention or control. It was about learning to listen, truly listen, without the need to fill every void with his own thoughts. He kept sticky notes on his bathroom mirror, scrawled with these 3 questions. A constant visual reminder to start his day with intentionality and empathy. And if on a particularly hectic or self-absorbed morning he ever skipped a day, Maya's gentle, unwavering smile would flash in his mind like a soft, persistent alarm clock, a silent nudge to bring him back to his newfound principles. Her presence, even in his thoughts, had become a powerful internal compass, guiding him towards a more considered, more human way of living. Robert Sterling's commitment to accessibility wasn't just about corporate policy, it was about innovation. His changed perspective led him to recognize untapped potential in areas he would have previously overlooked. This vision materialized when Sterling Industries acquired a small tech startup that was quietly developing groundbreaking haptic jewelry.
Yes, you
This
too.
wasn't just fashionable tech. It was designed to vibrate in distinct patterns, translating auditory information into tactile feedback. Imagine a gentle pulse for a doorbell, a rhythmic buzz for an alarm, or even subtle vibrations mirroring the cadence and emphasis of spoken words. They renamed it Touch Talk. The acquisition wasn't a hostile takeover.
Down to
It was a
business.
strategic partnership driven by a shared vision. And at the heart of this new venture was Maya.
It's important
Her
that you are
experience,
honest
her
about how you
profound
feel.
understanding of communication
We are here to
beyond
support you
sound
through this process.
made her the perfect
I'm
fit
interested
to lead
in
user
how
experience
you perceive
interviews.
the world.
She wasn't just a figurehead, she was an essential
And after all
architect of the
this,
product's
do you still
development.
believe that your
The
theory
first
holds
question
true?
she asked every tester, deaf or hearing, was simple yet profound. How do you want the world to feel when it speaks to you? This wasn't a technical question about latency or battery life. It was a deeply human inquiry, probing the emotional and experiential aspects of communication. Their answers, diverse and insightful, shaped not just the products Touch Talk developed, but also Sterling Industries' broader policies, and even the way people within the company thought about interaction. It led to innovations in haptic feedback for industrial machinery, tactile alerts for public transportation, and even subtle vibrational cues for musicians performing in silent environments. Maya's unique perspective, born from a lifetime of navigating a sound-centric world without hearing, was now driving technological advancements that promised to bridge communication gaps for millions. She was not just leading a program. She was helping to redefine how humanity would connect in the future. Just when Robert thought he had turned a corner, that his past was firmly behind him, the internet, in its relentless pursuit of truth or scandal, brought it all back. A tenacious journalist digging through old court records unearthed a painful chapter. Years ago, Robert had sued a former employee for slander after the worker blogged about workplace yelling and a toxic culture at Sterling Industries. The story framed against his new persona exploded. Hashtag Sterling Scars trended for hours, fueled by a wave of public outrage and a chorus of "I told you so" from his longtime critics. The old Robert would have issued a terse, legally vetted press release threatening countersuits, trying to control the narrative with an iron fist. But the new Robert did something entirely different. He issued no press release. He didn't engage in a PR battle. Instead, he reached out to the blogger, who coincidentally was a prominent deaf advocate. He invited her for coffee, not to negotiate, not to defend, but to talk. He ensured an experienced ASL interpreter was present, anticipating a difficult, potentially hostile conversation. And then he live-streamed the entire conversation, unfiltered, unedited, in front of a global audience with the hashtag Sterling Scars, hashtag still trending. Robert Sterling apologized. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't blame the past. He apologized, unprompted, unsigned, though the interpreter conveyed his words with perfect clarity and utterly unscripted. He spoke openly about his past behavior, his ignorance, the profound lesson Maya had taught him, and his ongoing journey to become a better leader and a better man. He acknowledged the pain he had caused, the validity of the blogger's claims, and the systemic issues within his company that he was now actively working to dismantle. The comments section, initially a torrent of outrage, began to shift slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. From typical billionaire PR stunt to, "Wow, this is actually genuine," to, "He's really owning it." Outrage gave way to respect, cynicism, to cautious admiration in real time. It was a raw, vulnerable moment of public reckoning, and in choosing transparency and genuine remorse over damage control, Robert Sterling silenced his critics not with force, but with humility. He proved that true transformation wasn't about erasing the past, but about confronting it head-on with integrity and a genuine desire for change. The changes Robert sparked extended far beyond the corporate realm, touching the personal lives of those around him in profound ways. Maya, whose quiet strength had been the catalyst for so much, finally moved into her own apartment. It wasn't just any apartment. It was a place with a breathtaking skyline view, a panorama of the city she had helped reshape. And from her balcony, she could feel the subtle vibrations through the floor when trains passed, a silent symphony of the city's pulse, a connection to the world she experienced in her own unique way. Robert, ever thoughtful, marked the occasion with a single symbolic gift, a robust houseplant. It arrived with a simple handwritten card that read, Growth needs
That
roots.
sounds excellent.
Yours are
We are
strong.
definitely aligned on
It
the
was a
key metrics
message
for
that
this quarter.
resonated deeply,
I'll have the revised
acknowledging her
proposals sent over by
unwavering
Friday.
resilience and her profound impact. Their communication, once confined to notepads and hesitant signs, had also evolved.
We need
She
to review the
FaceTimed him
hiring
now,
quotas
confident
and the
and
latest
articulate on
accessibility
video calls,
audits.
with captions running seamlessly, ensuring every
The
nuance was
unexpected beauty
captured.
of poetry in ASL.
Their conversations were no longer just about business or ASL
That
lessons.
sounds excellent.
They
We are
chatted about
definitely aligned
hiring
on the key
quotas
metrics
and
for
the
this
ongoing
quarter.
accessibility
I'll have the
audits,
revised
yes,
proposals sent over
but
by
also
Friday.
about the unexpected beauty of poetry in ASL, the way it could convey emotion and imagery with a breathtaking fluidity that
We need
spoken
to review
words
the hiring
sometimes
quotas
struggled to
and the
capture.
latest
And they
accessibility
spoke often
audits.
about the profound power of silence.
The
Robert, once a man
unexpected
who
beauty
filled
of
every space
poetry
with
in
his own
ASL.
voice, had come to understand that silence could be louder than words, more expressive, more revealing. Maya, who had lived a life of profound silence, had taught him that it wasn't an absence, but a presence, a space where true listening could occur, where understanding could truly blossom. In their quiet conversations, they continued to learn from each other, building a friendship founded on mutual respect, shared wisdom, and the profound realization that some of the most powerful truths are spoken without a single sound. 5 years later, the seed sown by a chance encounter had blossomed into a thriving forest of opportunity. Sterling Industries hosted the city's first ever Deaf Career Fair, an event that transcended mere corporate outreach and became a beacon of possibility. The sheer scale was astounding. Over 2,000 attendees flocked to the convention center, a vibrant hub of talent and ambition. And by the end of the day, 145 on-the-spot hires had been made, placing skilled deaf professionals into roles ranging from software development to marketing, from logistics to leadership. It was a testament to the fact that inclusion wasn't just good for business. It was creating genuine, life-changing opportunities. The opening keynote, a moment usually reserved for the company's founder and figurehead, wasn't given by Robert. He walked to the podium, a familiar, confident stride, but then, in a gesture that spoke volumes, he handed the microphone over. And then he handed it again, palms up, a silent invitation to Maya. She stepped forward, a quiet force of nature, her presence commanding immediate attention. The room hushed. As she began to sign, her movements fluid and expressive, a voice interpreter standing respectfully beside her spoke her words aloud, ensuring everyone in the vast hall could receive her message. Anger. She signed her hands, telling a story of past friction, taught me patience. Her gaze then shifted to Robert, a warmth in her eyes. Impatience, she continued, taught him empathy. Her hands then came together, fingers interlaced, a symbol of unity. Today we meet in the middle, where sound and silence shake hands. The final image, her hands clasped, reverberated through the hall. A standing ovation erupted, not just polite applause, but a thunderous, heartfelt roar that lasted an astonishing 8 minutes. Robert, standing just off to the side, timed it on his watch, a private moment of profound satisfaction. Tears, unbidden and visible, welled in his eyes, but there was no shame, only a deep, abiding gratitude. This wasn't just his legacy. It was their legacy, a testament to the transformative power of a single quiet voice and a billionaire's willingness to truly listen. It was a legacy built on understanding, on respect, and on the simple, undeniable truth that everyone deserves to be heard. Robert Sterling never yelled at another waiter. That particular ugly chapter of his life was firmly closed. He still slammed tables, yes, but now it was to the rhythm of music at company talent shows, where employees performed quiet poetry in ASL or showcased their hidden talents in an environment of acceptance and joy. The force that once propelled his anger now fueled his enthusiasm for connection, for celebration. And Maya. She kept serving tables once a week, not out of necessity, but because, as she simply put it, If I stop listening with my eyes, I might forget how people truly speak. Her weekly shifts were a grounding ritual, a reminder of where she came from, and a continued lesson in human observation. She was a living bridge between worlds, a constant source of quiet wisdom. The billionaire who had everything, who could buy any luxury, command any service, learned the one thing money couldn't buy: the immense, often invisible weight of unheard words. He learned the cost of ignorance and the priceless value of genuine understanding. And the waitress who heard nothing, who navigated a world of sound in profound silence, gave the loudest, most enduring lesson of all. Kindness translates every language, transcends every barrier. And silence, when met with respect, when truly listened to, echoes farther and resonates deeper than any shout could ever hope to. It's a lesson that continues to reverberate, a quiet revolution that began with a slammed table and ended with a handshake between sound and silence. If this story, this journey of transformation, has changed the way you see anger, or perhaps made you truly notice the quiet strength behind a smile, or even just made you think differently about the people who serve your coffee, please hit share. Let this message ripple further. Tell us in the comments, when did silence teach you the most profound lesson? What moment of quiet understanding shifted your perspective? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life lessons that flip the script, because sometimes the quietest voices truly do make the biggest impact.